Namaste. Sitting here, just saying nothing would be the optimal teaching. Language creates a whole series of unsolvable dilemmas and problems that are built within communication itself. Those dilemmas have to do with mainly the mind becoming active. To go into thinking is to create a kind of unknowingness. A blindness. Just the way the waves on the ocean, by breaking and foaming and spreading, create a kind of distraction over the ocean's silence. Thinking has the same effect on the mind. Therefore, the oceanic quality of the mind is lost to thinking. When you begin communicating even more technically, involving more of the mind's comprehending potential, then even more unknowingness ensues. No doubt there is a kind of clarity in technical expression, and you can see that in the academic world. There is a kind of brilliance that is displayed on a solely intellectual level. But when we are talking about the whole mind exhibiting itself and showing itself, it cannot remain in that specified and narrowed area that we call the conscious mind or the waking state mind, the mind that is fully involved with causality. The expansive, elastic power and depth of the mind is lost. Even though, paradoxically, a kind of elasticity and expansion is also produced. If you've read brilliant writers, you can see what I mean. You know what I mean. But here, what is happening has a distinctly different character than engaging in the field of knowledge alone. Knowledge alone is not sufficient. At the base of the mind, in the root of attention, there's another quality of being that's present that is not confined to the waking state. That's the area that I am offering you as a possibility of revelation, simultaneous revelation with your thinking mind. So thinking might begin to think something that ordinarily is not thought. Thinking will proceed out of being. Usually it's separate. Usually it becomes caught up in its own activity to such an extent that it loses connection with being. Here we are reestablishing thinking in being, and my thinking and my speaking are an inducement to come into this unique situation. All that I say, all that I am, is in that open field. The words will have a special quality, therefore, in not just informing intellectually through meaning, but also clearing a path or opening into that root of attention, that part of the mind which transcends itself. How this is done is not in any technical literature. You can describe it as meditation. To meditate means to think. But it also implies going to the deeper aspects of thinking. Awareness itself begins to comprehend even as thinking is going on in its old systematic fashion. Awareness can begin to turn in on itself and fathom the reality of consciousness itself. All my words are embedded in that. You could say my words are animated by that, therefore carrying the power of that absolute field. It will be difficult for thinking to run away with you. Thinking will be corralled or subjugated by that primal force out of which thinking arises. And this will be meditation. This will be the way in which meditation happens. That the power of being begins to permeate the mind, drawing the superficial mind down into the depths of awareness itself. Attention will be the corridor to the root of the mind. Thinking will walk down the corridor and then begin to feel immersed in that which precedes attention. Once you delve into that level of depth, then you can actually begin to understand the entire range of the mind, where it begins and where it ends. And you can undergo a radical sense of waking up. Something that happens at that source. A unique resuscitation occurs at that deepened level. Something strikes the mind into an abrupt breaking with its own continuity, and then frees it. Freedom becomes sensed, and that opening begins to have its own powerful movement. And you can begin to feel the kind of peace that exudes out of that experience. peace will erupt and begin to show you something quite different than what is ordinarily sensed with the waking mind. The waking mind knows the distinction between noise and silence, but we're talking here about a quietude that transcends that. It's not the byproduct of the opposites. You could say it's the movement of bliss itself, the movement of recognition itself, which has the power to eradicate suffering, conflict, misery, all that usually goes under the name of attachment. And what will replace it is this flotation in consciousness itself. Consciousness will take the whole being into itself. And consciousness will then deconstruct the reality of the individual being that has been taken in. It will subsume individuality. This whole movement requires an extraordinary amount of energy, a condensed form of energy. When I say energy, I don't mean the kind of energy you see in a long-distance runner or professional basketball player, where there's a huge amount of physical energy expenditure. I'm talking here about the power of the silence within being, a power that has waking up potential in it. It has enlightening power. Just by following me with both your mind and your feeling and your senses, your attention, you can be bridged into this entire discussion, the meaning of this entire discussion. The words of the discussion are not the thing itself, but the words are not a barrier either. And so through the words you can open the door to your understanding, or to your feeling, or to your energy, the bodily energy that holds you and that lives you. Through any of those avenues you can open or be opened. There's always room for misunderstanding on the level of the mind. Misunderstanding about what these words mean, what they signify. If you become involved in an overly analytical approach, then the other will not happen. You will only lose yourself in the wanderings of the mind. So this requires a deep and gentle and persevering kind of unforced attention gathered into one's self. And it requires heart establishment. It requires that the center of your living, of your livingness, be in your heart. So even though the head begins to think, as mine is thinking now, or apparently so, the heart is overwhelming the whole process. The heart meaning consciousness itself. You will have to do this in your own way. Just walking this path, you can understand how this opening occurs and how you are spontaneously welcomed in to this invitation, and how to let yourself go. The only thing that makes this real and not a mere discussion is the transmission power from that level of being that I discussed earlier. The availability of that transmission power, that's what makes this something more than an academic presentation, more than a talk. It's beginning to come up in the bliss of being itself, that you actually begin to come up in that, or it in you. Something that will not speak to a part of you. This is the key point. Not a part of you can become involved in this, but the entirety of you. And for that to happen, there's got to be something called loving abidance, or heartfelt abidance in your own reality, moment by moment. Not to be in conflict with yourself, or to simply let the conflict play itself out and have this other bliss transmission replace it. How this actually happens is grace. Grace meaning not some vague religious concept, but a free opening into the very thing that is being discussed. The actual opening of that reality, that's what grace would be in this instance. The possibility for human beings to come together and enjoy the spontaneously arising wisdom and bliss in the singleness of being is real spiritual instruction. It's the highest practice. It's the practice that fulfills all practices.